Welcome, everyone. My name is Debbie Magwood, and I'm the Executive Director of the West Island Cancer Wellness Center and your host for this evening. Before we begin, I just want to talk to you a little bit about the importance of cancer wellness. Over the years, there's been umpteen studies telling us how incredibly important it is. And one of the things that the West Island Cancer Wellness Center has done is we've divided our wellness regime into 7 pillars. And we have classes that represent all of these pillars. So let me just give you a quick peek at what the pillars are. Oops. Remember to keep yourself muted, please. Okay, so the 7 pillars are physical, so our physical well-being, psychological, emotional, that includes all mental health, spiritual, social, informational, practical, and systemic. And it's important for you all to see or to understand that all the classes that we give and the sessions that we give at the West Island Cancer Wellness Center, either be them remotely through Zoom or over the phone or from being actually in the center, are all empirically proven to have some kind of incredible magical impact on your cancer journey. So don't hesitate ever to reach out to us by phone, by email, or after this session for that matter, if you want to get more involved or you want to understand more how you can give yourself a more balanced perspective in wellness. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our esteemed speaker for this evening. We have Dr. Peter Butt, who is the co-chair on the Canadian Guidance on Alcohol and Health, the final report. Dr. Butt, would you mind if I would refer to you as Peter throughout this presentation?
That would be fine.
Perfect. And Sandy, if you could put down the slide, please. All right, so Dr. Butt, Peter, welcome very much. Thank you for coming to be with us this evening. Would you just tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. Well, I live outside of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan on the Northern Plains, which is very windy and snowy today. I am an associate professor in the Department of Family Medicine, the College of Medicine at the University of Saskatchewan, and I served as the co-chair with Dr. Catherine Paradis from the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction on this project funded by Health Canada to develop the Canadian Guidance on Alcohol and Health.
Well, welcome. And thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
So can you tell us a little bit about why this report was initiated and by whom?
Yes, well, the funding came from Health Canada. I was involved as chair of the Expert Advisory Committee in the development of the Canadian Low Risk Drinking Guidelines that were released in 2011. And those were considerably more generous than what we're seeing today. Some of you might recall that it was no more than 2 standard drinks in a day for women, no more than 3 for men, and no more than 10 in a week for women, 15 in a week for men. So it was quite generous. That was the data and the evidence that we had at that time. Subsequently, however, over the intervening 10 years, the UK has updated their low risk drinking guidelines, as has France and Australia. And each of those incrementally came down from higher levels to lower levels with regards to their definition of low risk alcohol consumption, low risk drinking. So we knew that the literature, the evidence had shifted over the past 10 years. We knew that it was trending down. We knew that there was increased quality with regards to the evidence between conditions that the World Health Organization has established as being causally associated with cancer and heart disease and other conditions with regards to alcohol and health. We also had evidence, emerging evidence, excuse me, that people who were drinking within the previous guidelines were potentially coming to harm. So this created an imperative amongst not only Health Canada, but also alcohol researchers to consider an updating of those low risk drinking guidelines.
Okay.
And with funding from Health Canada, we were able to do so.
Okay, perfect. And this wasn't just like a study with one grand group size. It was more of a situation of reflecting and looking over many studies, correct?
Absolutely. So what was required in order to do this updating, to really look at the evidence, was to use the researchers from not only CCSA, but also CAMH, Dr. Kevin Shield, and others. We had 23 experts in alcohol from coast to coast, representing 16 different organizations as experts contributing on our various panels. And this required a deeper dive in the literature, because in order to come up with guidance, we needed to do mathematical modeling. Excuse me. We needed to do mathematical modeling. And this required the best evidence that showed the relationship between conditions caused by alcohol and the dose effect, the amount that people are consuming. So you need this dose response curve with regards to increased risk and harm related to alcohol consumption. And we were looking at years of life lost. We were looking at risk thresholds, and we were looking at comparing this to lifetime abstainers, not current abstainers, which is what has been used in studies related to alcohol and health in the past, because current abstainers include what we call sick quitters, people who can no longer drink alcohol because of their health. Not necessarily because of an alcohol use disorder, but maybe because of the medication that they're on, or their frailty, or whatever the case may be. So we compared it to lifetime abstainers. So this gave us a better comparison between what is the impact of alcohol consumption at different levels on health and well-being.
Okay. And before we jump into the actual results of this particular study, that again is called the Canadian Guidance on Alcohol and Health, the final report, which was dated January 2023. I'd like us to discuss a little bit about the whole idea of preventability of cancer. Can you tell us what percentage of cancer is hereditary, what percentage is lifestyle or environment, or even just, what's the percentage of random error made by cells that creates cancer?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer, because we're not so neat and tidy with regards to our cancer journey. Typically, it's multifactorial. There may be genetics, there may be environmental factors, there may be exposure to carcinogens that are involved in this, as well as lifestyle. So when it comes to alcohol and cancer, there are three things that are required in order for a cancer to be established as causally related to alcohol. Number one, there has to be proof at a cellular level that cancer and the cells in those tissues generate cancer. Or pardon me, alcohol and the cells from that tissue generate cancer. Then there has to be replication in animal models, exposure typically of a rat to alcohol to see what cancers might occur over time. And then thirdly, there needs to be evidence in terms of population studies, population health studies. And the World Health Organization recognizes 9. We looked predominantly at 7 because the evidence was much stronger. 7 of the cancers causally associated with alcohol: mouth, throat or pharyngeal, the larynx or voice box, the esophagus, the colon, the rectum, the liver, and breast cancer. So it makes sense that when you drink something that, well, we know cancer is a carcinogenic. Pardon me. We know that alcohol is a carcinogenic. We know that alcohol is a teratogenic. It causes birth defects, FASD. No warning labels. This isn't something that people are necessarily aware of, including healthcare providers. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done. But when you drink something that's going to be irritating to the throat and to the GI tract, it makes sense that it's going to cause some inflammation and changes. So the role of cancer with regards to the mouth and throat is about 30% of those are caused by alcohol. When you get down to the rectum, a much lower percentage, closer to 7%, are caused by alcohol. However, when we talk about breast and colon cancer, the number caused by alcohol is lower compared to the mouth, but it's a much more common cancer. So more people infected or affected. So you see this balance back and forth. As much as possible with the systemic reviews or systematic reviews that we used to look at the data, they tried to clear out some of the genetic factors, co-occurrence with smoking and some of the lifestyle factors and that sort of thing that may complicate the picture to get as clear a view as possible on this relationship between alcohol and cancer causation.
Peter, could you tell us maybe a little bit, what is it specifically in alcohol that is a carcinogenic?
Well, alcohol itself can be carcinogenic. Alcohol then gets metabolized pardon me, I'm blocking on that.
It's okay.
There's acetaldehyde. Sorry, I was thinking of the enzyme acetaldehyde, which some of you may be familiar with, but acetaldehyde is even more carcinogenic than alcohol itself. So it goes through this cascade of something that's less carcinogenic to something that's more carcinogenic. So the longer that those breakdown products are in the system, the longer people are exposed to a carcinogen. I'm going to have to pause my feed here because but I'll keep on with the audio and then come back as soon as I can. So this is where the chronic effect of alcohol is important as opposed to the acute effects. So we look primarily at the chronic exposure and the chronic exposure to the acetaldehyde as well as the alcohol itself. And what we find with that is that women are more sensitive to the chronic effects than men, in part because there's decreased lean body mass. Women tend to be smaller than men in terms of their lean body mass. And secondly, they have less alcohol dehydrogenase to metabolize alcohol to acetaldehyde and then on into a point where it's excreted. So drink for drink, once you get above 7 standard drinks per week, drink for drink, women's blood alcohol level is going to go up higher and stay up higher longer than a man drinking the same amount. So more susceptible.
So there are many people who believe that it's actually sugars that is dangerous vis-a-vis alcohol. Is that the case as well?
No. Obviously, you may be concerned in terms of weight gain, and there's calories in alcohol. We don't have nutritional labeling on alcohol, even though it's intended to be ingested. So, from a dietary point of view, they're empty calories and don't have a nutritional contribution at all.
Okay, so let's jump on into this to the results. As you mentioned earlier, prior to 2021 or 2022, the recommendation was 10 standard drinks a week for a woman and no more than 2 drinks a day, and 15 standard drinks for a male and no more than 3 drinks a day. And it is this recommendation, it is recommended that people have days every week with no alcohol consumption. Now the results are this. We'll put up your slide for you here.
Yes. So what we did was we landed on a continuum of risk. Unlike what was reported in the media, we weren't telling everyone that they should drink no more than 2 standard drinks per week. What we did when we developed the risk curves that reflected the relative risk of developing a cancer or heart disease or something like that there's over 200 different conditions that are causally associated with alcohol, including high blood pressure. So there are many conditions that can be exacerbated by alcohol. So we developed through Dr. Kevin Shield at CAMH, who's a World Health Organization expert in epidemiological modeling, the risk curves, and asked him to show us the cut point where the risk of someone dying prematurely was at the level of 1 in 1,000. And then another cut point or threshold where the risk was at 1 in 100. So at 1 in 1,000, that would be the risk of 1 out of 1,000 people drinking at that level, dying prematurely. So we looked at years of life lost, and it was 17.5 years of life lost. And this isn't divided up amongst 1,000 people. So, everyone in that group gets so many days or hours. Rather, it was about one person out of that group having a reduced life expectancy. That 1 in 1,000 level at 2 standard drinks per week is the same risk that most people accept for a voluntary activity like unprotected sex, and it's also the risk that people have of drowning. So that's about where the 1 in 1,000 threshold is. Voluntary risk level. For involuntary exposure to water, unsafe water, air pollution, people generally accept a risk level of 1 in a million in terms of death. But in terms of voluntary activity, 1 in 1,000. When you get up to 1 in 100, which is a 10-time greater risk, that was a level, and it came out at the 6 standard drinks per week. That was a level that's typically used for alcohol exposure for social, cultural, and economic reasons. Because of our Western society attachment to alcohol, people tend to tolerate a higher level of exposure and the risk that's attached to it. And that's the level that's comparable to dying in a motor vehicle crash. There's a big difference, though, because most of us need to drive in order to go to work and to get around this very large country. So it's not as if it's entirely voluntary, but you could argue that alcohol exposure is something that we can control as individuals. So that's how the risk zone was developed. 2 and less, low risk in terms of health consequences. 3 to 6 standard drinks per week, you have an increasing risk. We called it moderate with regards to developing those several different types of cancers that I mentioned. But then as you get to 7 standard drinks, so that's just 1 a day plus 7 standard drinks per day and more, you get into an increasingly high risk zone, not only in terms of cancer risk, but also heart disease, increasing risk of liver disease, and so on.
And injury, so, I would presume as well, correct?
Well, accidents and injuries, absolutely. And some of that's due to chronic exposure. We can model that, but some of it is also due to acute exposure, how much a person is drinking on one occasion that leads to inebriation and then accidents or injuries and violence.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned at the top of this question how the media took hold of the results of this study. And, I just did a quick search over, the last few weeks and into January when it was published. And it was so dominant. It was no more than 2 drinks a week, or you'll be, and that was the way that it was presented everywhere. Is that hurting this message that you're trying to get across at all, this sensationalism that the media has made with these results?
It has, because of course it led to people commenting in the media that we're being extremists, that we're prohibitionists, that we're completely anti-alcohol, that this is an impossible level for anyone to achieve. People would roll their eyes and say that we were completely irrelevant. That wasn't the recommendation, however. And I think you have recommendation slides coming up that reflect what the recommendations actually were. And here we have something from the media. We did not propose no more than 2 drinks per week. That it is part of the risk zone chart or graph that we presented to you, but that wasn't what we thought everyone should land on. really those risk zones are intended to help people to reflect on their drinking and consider reduction.
And when
So
you speak of a standard drink, could you just elaborate on that a little bit more?
yes, and this is something that seems quite arcane, and people can be quite forgiven for not understanding what a standard drink is, because of course we don't have it labeled on beverage
Mhm.
alcohol. A standard drink in Canada is 13.45 grams of ethanol. Now, why did we come up with that number? Well, historically, that would be in a standard bottle of 5% beer or a cider or a glass of wine. That would be a 5-ounce glass of 12% alcohol wine. So in a 750 ml bottle of wine, you would typically have about maybe a little bit more than 5 standard drinks. Also, it would be equivalent to 1.5 ounces of spirits or liquor. So these were sort of relatable quantities of alcohol in terms of what was historically sold in Canada. But now it's changed quite dramatically. We have higher levels of alcohol in wine. We have beer that is 8%. We have tall boys of beer. We also have low alcohol beer and zero alcohol content beverages. So it's really hard for a consumer to manage their alcohol intake if they can't measure it. So that's why we would really very much recommend that the government have standard drink labeling at the point of pour. So it's on the bottle, not requiring a cell phone and digital technology to be able to interpret how many standard drinks there are. But, right there on the bottle, is it 1? Is it 0.5? Is it 1.5? The consumer has a right to know. And that's a basic principle.
Yeah, we'll frequently hear somebody saying, well, I only drink beer, or I only have, wine, as compared to, not referring to what a standard size drink is actually. A glass of wine is the same as an ounce and a half of alcohol, and that's a really important variable when we talk about consumption.
And that would be a 5-ounce glass of wine. And sometimes you get larger pours in the hospitality industry. Sometimes people have glasses at home that are much more than 5 ounces as well. So unfortunately, a lot of the way that we define our alcohol consumption is generated by the social milieu that we're in, by peers, particularly as youth or adolescents, and then depending upon the age group and the social group that we drink with, that often tends to be what we think is sociable, responsible, and low risk. But actually, the evidence is quite different.
Yes, I guess that's the scariest part about this study, is that, alcohol has become so socialized. You will infrequently go to an event or a family gathering and not be offered an alcohol drink.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, part of the importance of this study is to allow people to at least have the information to make healthy and wise decisions moving forward.
Absolutely. And when you think about it, alcohol in our society at least marks transitions from the workday to the evening, from the work week to the weekend. It's celebratory for special events. And so it's embedded in a lot of what we do socially. People drink for both personal and social reasons. The important thing to keep in mind, though, is that when we're drinking to socialize, it's for the company. And is it about the company, or is it about the chemical? How much of that alcohol is necessary to be able to celebrate and enjoy each other's company, to mark that transition? And there have certainly been studies that have shown that people can enjoy themselves by qualitative scales equally as much with less alcohol. The amount of alcohol was masked in this study, but they were just as happy and they enjoyed themselves just as much as people that were drinking more alcohol, until you get to the point of inebriation where things change dramatically. And of course, that can sometimes cause problems with how we socialize when people are overtly drunk.
Mm-hmm. And for the record, we're not addressing drinking people who have drinking problems in this presentation at all. We're just talking about like sort of the regular drinking behaviors.
Yes, that's
Um,
right. And about alcohol and health more broadly, because when we drink alcohol, it goes everywhere in the body. We don't direct the organ that it goes to. And we can't say, well, I heard it's good for my coronary arteries, so I'm drinking for those, but I'm going to ignore my family history of breast cancer, my liver condition, other aspects of heart health, and so on. Doesn't work that way. Has a whole body impact. So we need to be thinking about health quite holistically.
what about all the studies at one point that were pointing to, how it's actually healthy to have a glass of wine every day? Um,
Yes. Yeah.
what
And
do you
this
think
was,
about that?
well, this has been the evidence historically behind the J curve, where mortality went down and then when it went up, and it supported moderate drinking and heart health. The cardiologists were all over this, as were a lot of people in the media, and of course the industry. They wanted to position their product as a health food.
Mm,
You could go on the Beer Canada website, and they had the beer cross instead of the red cross. It was a beer cross, promoting all of the healthy benefits of drinking beer. Unfortunately, that really hasn't carried through in terms of the evidence. Over time, that J curve has gotten more and more shallow. And in our studies, what we found is that it wasn't statistically significant. There was a very moderate, but not statistically significant decrease in risk in terms of coronary artery disease and ischemic stroke. But when it came to other aspects of heart health, atrial fibrillation and flutter, high blood pressure, cardiomyopathy, heart failure, the World Heart Federation came out a year or two ago with a policy brief that said basically alcohol is not good for the heart. When you look at it in terms of the whole organ and all the effects on the cardiovascular system of alcohol, it is not recommended.
I
Period.
actually have a really great question here from our audience. So the chart that we spoke about was designated into a week. So if somebody, for example, didn't drink for 3 weeks, could they then drink more on that fourth week?
Yeah. Yes. Well, people would want to negotiate that, and people would want to be able to have it all on one day as well. So you wait until a paycheck and then you binge for the month, and then you go back to work if you still have a job. That's not the pattern that would be recommended. And indeed, that's why we also commissioned a study to look at per occasion consumption. Again, to address, well, if you pool them together, are we avoiding some of these problems? In terms of the studies, it is the average level of consumption over a week by surveys. So that's what this is based upon. And with regards to per occasion consumption, they found that at above 2 standard drinks on an occasion, you're more likely to run into problems with accidents, injuries, or violence. A lot of that is mediated by acute inebriation, so not being steady on one's feet, falling down, maybe getting into an altercation, this sort of thing. So 2 drinks on an occasion maximum. For older adults, one might be wise to cut that in half and stop at 1 because of frailty, difference in metabolism of alcohol and lean body mass. So an older adult, drink for drink will have and that's over the age of 60 or 65, drink for drink will have a 30% increase in their blood alcohol concentration compared to a younger adult. Same amount consumed, but the blood alcohol concentration will be higher. And so if they're frail, if they're on different types of medication, they need to be more careful as we age with regards to how much we drink. You did have a question, though, if I can segue back with regards to this heart healthy mythology around alcohol, particularly red wine. And a lot of that is attached to the Mediterranean diet. So it was kind of conflated because not only was there red wine, maybe white wine, but typically red wine in the diet, but there was also a lot of fruits and vegetables, olive oil. There was in that population a higher level of physical activity, more walking and so on than the average sedentary North American. And there were also genetic differences amongst Mediterranean people. So when they tried to replicate these studies in Asia or Northern Europe and so on, the benefit wasn't nearly as great. So a lot of this was felt to be attributable to a Mediterranean lifestyle and a Mediterranean diet as opposed to red wine. But
Oh,
of course, the
that's
industry
incredibly,
isn't going to tell you that.
that's a really fascinating conclusion. So that means basically in Europe or in China or anywhere else, Australia, anywhere else in the world, these guidelines wouldn't necessarily reflect what they're experiencing. They would.
No, yes and no. Yes, in terms of you may be looking at a less diverse genetic pool compared to Canada or North America. You may be looking at different levels of physical activity if people walk rather than use cars, as well as differences in terms of the diet that people have access to and tend to use traditionally. But on the other hand, when you look at what's evolved in terms of low-risk drinking guidelines internationally, and we're all using similar sort of modeling, which the EU has supported in the World Health Organization, you have to keep in mind that a standard drink or an alcohol unit in the UK is 8 grams. Canada is 13.45. When they talk about 14 units of alcohol in a week, that equates to 8 Canadian standard drinks. Now that was from 2014. You move up to a few years ago when the Australians were doing their work and France as well. Their standard drink is 10 grams of alcohol. Again, we're 13.45. So when they were recommending 10 standard drinks per week, that would equate to 7 Canadian standard drinks. They were using that 1 in 100 cut point. So that's at the top end of our moderate risk zone. And they're very interested in the fact that we have this whole health approach and that we've included the 1 in 1,000 cut point, which we called low risk, a moderate risk zone that takes you up to that 1 in 100. And other countries have tended to use that 1 in 100, again, for social, economic, and political reasons rather than health reasons. So we endeavor to be much more transparent about this relationship between alcohol exposure, and health.
I think it's a perfect segue to us to focus a little bit further and deeper on the risk factors. And I know that in this study, it gave us staggering statistic, about 8,000 deaths in Canada. In the same year, the costs associated with alcohol use in Canada were 16.6 billion, with 5.4 billion of that sum spent on health care. Right. Has the number increased over the years, or are we just realizing it and studying it deeper?
It's a bit of both. Part of it is that we're becoming more attuned to the impact of alcohol on health. And when we started this study, we did focus groups, and Canadians told us they were also interested in the impact of alcohol on mental health, as well as on violence. And so we commissioned additional reports on that. We also did one that had a sex and gender perspective attached to it to look at alcohol in women's health and the per occasion drinking. But it's interesting because the Canadian Institute for Health Information was trying to get statistics on hospitalizations due to alcohol use. And they struggled a bit because they could only really narrowly take it down to hospitalizations that were directly attributable to alcohol use, such as cirrhosis of the liver, for example, or alcohol cardiomyopathy, where it was really a clear and direct connection between alcohol and the reason for their hospitalization. It didn't take into consideration indirect causes, such as alcohol leading to trauma, leading to hospitalization. So it was if anything, a conservative level of reporting around hospitalization. But what they found is that more people were being admitted for alcohol than for heart attacks.
Hence that number, $5.4 billion in
Yeah.
1 year related to healthcare.
There is a study that people can Google if they want. It's called CSUCH, the Canadian Substance Use Costs and Harm Study, done with CCSA and the Canadian Institute for Substance Use Research at the University of Victoria. And what the CSUCH study does is it breaks down not only the costs and harms of various substances across the country, alcohol, opioids, stimulants, tobacco, and so on, but it also breaks it down province or territory by province or territory right across the country. So you can see what the level of costs and harms are jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And for most of the provinces, and indeed nationally, alcohol is number one. It costs more harms and costs. And this includes not only healthcare, but also corrections, policing, absenteeism from work, and so on. So alcohol is number one in most provinces except the Maritimes, where tobacco is number one. But it's interesting because the ones that are legal especially cannabis, not cannabis, but especially tobacco and alcohol are number 1 and 2 across the country because of increased exposure and increased use. It'll be interesting to see where cannabis settles out over time now that it's been legalized.
And when we speak of risk, and we look at the sort of the pyramid of amount of alcohol consumed, what is actually defined as risk? And maybe we can put up the slide here and you can speak to that a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Sure. If you actually go back to the continuum of risk, I can explain it more generally first, and then we could go to the
one back, Sandy.
Yeah.
One back, 2 back.
One more back. That's
Perfect.
it. Yeah. Okay, so this is both based on relative risk in terms of the risk of developing a causally generated alcohol condition, such as the cancers that I mentioned, as well as absolute risk. So you have all of these relative risk curves. If you drink so much alcohol, here's your risk of these different conditions. But you also want to know, well, what's your absolute risk? Because it all combines in the body. And that's where we use that 1 in 1,000 threshold that gave us the 2 standard drinks per week. And the 1 in 100 risk threshold, that's your absolute risk threshold at 6 standard drinks per week. So if we go to the slide that you were going to put up, what you have here is the increased risk of diseases and injuries for women based on average weekly alcohol use. So this is standard drinks per week. So if you go up to 7, that would be 1 standard drink a day. Not really a particularly high level of consumption for a lot of folks, but 60% of Canadians drink 6 standard drinks or lower per day, including the 22% of Canadians who are abstinent. So just in terms of the general population. When it comes to people who drink in Canada, it's about 50-50, 6 standard drinks and less. 50% of people will be drinking above 7 standard drinks. And when you when you look at the people who do drink, then of course you've got a significant number that are drinking the majority of alcohol in the country. But at 7 standard drinks, as you go through and drop it down, you see this increased risk. Tuberculosis is certainly there. People may find that peculiar, but certainly this is based upon international studies where there's higher levels of exposure to tuberculosis. You see a 37% increase in the risk of oral, mouth, and pharyngeal cancer, 18% for esophageal. Colorectal, you need a slightly higher level of alcohol intake, but you're almost at 10% there. Liver cancer, 5%. Breast cancer, 12.6% at 1 standard drink a day. and
Peter,
so on.
could you maybe just go explain to us a little bit deeper why it's alcohol and cancer in particular are so interconnected vis-a-vis the amount of alcohol you drink?
Sure, because with the increased amounts that you drink, you have increased exposure to a dose of a carcinogen. And as I mentioned before, there are three criteria that have to be met to call this cancer causally associated with alcohol. One is that you can see that cell exposure, such as breast cells exposed to alcohol, leading to mutations that generate tumors. You see it replicated in animal models. So if you feed female rats alcohol, they'll develop a certain risk of breast cancer. And then you see this association in population studies between the amount that people drink and the development of cancer. This isn't to make anyone feel bad or guilty, but it's simply to inform the public with regards to, there's a risk here, folks, and people have a right to know. What we do with that information is up to us individually, but we do have a right to know as consumers. And that's true for not only breast tissue, but I also mentioned the mouth and the throat, the esophagus, the liver, the larynx, the colon and rectum, and so on. What you see here in terms of a decreased risk in terms of pancreatitis and diabetes is a difficult one to explain, except that it could be related to the quality of the data that we have. When we look at the same sort of table for men and risk from alcohol use, we don't see that beneficial effect for diabetes or pancreatitis.
Okay.
And this is what you see here for males. Down here, diabetes, mildly protective, but not statistically significant. Pancreatitis, you see what we see clinically, which is an increased risk with increased consumption, even starting at relatively low levels.
Thank you.
If you go back to if you look at liver cirrhosis here, what you see in the middle of the graph, liver cirrhosis is increasing risk with increased consumption. But if you go back to liver cirrhosis on the female slide, which I believe is the one before, you see a dramatic increase in liver cirrhosis. This is a reflection of just how sensitive women are to the cumulative effect of alcohol. So they go down harder and faster than men when it comes to regular drinking.
Thank you for taking a bit of a deeper dive into that for us. Earlier on, you also spoke about advertising on bottles. Do you feel like eventually we're going to be heading in that direction where it's going to show what a standard drink is, but also that it's going to sort of look like the cigarette pack where you see, different warning signs?
Mm-hmm. So there are four different types of labels that one could look at. More if you want to include QR codes and that sort of thing that are digital. But there's the standard drink labeling so that people can measure what they're pouring and thereby manage their alcohol intake better. This was a Health Canada funded study. The Minister of Addictions and Mental Health, Carolyn Bennett, came out with a statement a few weeks ago saying that they really wanted the industry to regulate this. They wanted them to do it through a process of self-regulation. I think that takes us back to the tobacco dynamics and what Big Tobacco did in terms of their resistance to any sort of labeling. This is going to be a process. It's not going to be an event. I don't expect stunning success when it comes to labeling being taken on voluntarily by the industry, but it remains to be seen. The whinging that we hear is a bit hard to swallow because many of these companies are multinational brewers and distillers and vintners, and 40 different countries in the world, actually more than 40 different countries in the world, have some sort of mandatory alcohol labeling required. So standard drinks could be one. The other would be warning labels. As I said, alcohol is carcinogenic and teratogenic. It causes heart disease, but there's absolutely no warning labels. Unlike your plastic wrap when you get something from IKEA. It warns you about suffocation risk. Well, people aren't tending to put that over their head, but I guess they might. Whereas with alcohol, it's intended to be ingested, and yet there's no warning label whatsoever. Then there's the in some jurisdictions they have nutritional labeling, and this actually might be of benefit to the industry because low alcohol content beverages have fewer calories. So people who want to enjoy a drink but have fewer calories in their diet might go to a lower alcohol content beer or wine or whatever, or maybe a zero alcohol content. And then the fourth one is in some jurisdictions, they have the lowest drinking guidelines on the label as well. So those are the four categories that we have for beverage alcohol. None of those include a graphic picture of cirrhotic liver or a cancer tumor. So I don't think that we're looking at anything at all compared to what you see on tobacco labeling, but simply respecting the principle that the consumer has a right to know, and that it's best to deliver this at the point of pour.
And that brings up another point that's in this report. It states that alcohol literacy is actually very low. And that's actually why it was that statement in the report, along with other things, obviously, but that statement that sort of touched us quite deeply and why we're offering this discussion this evening. So what is the federal government doing to try to increase alcohol literacy across Canada?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know what they're committing themselves to. The only thing that I've heard was the announcement from Minister Bennett with regards to the calling on the industry to come up with self-regulation with regards to standard drink labels. I don't think that they've received enough political pressure on this to make a decision with regards to warning labels or any other type of labeling. It was not the Health Canada that took the lead in terms of tobacco packaging labeling, but rather it was from different pressure groups and lobby groups and that sort of thing that had to push back against the industry and industry misinformation. And certainly in some of the media responses, it was interesting. You dig down and it's not hard to find who's funding some of the people who were critical of the study in terms of the alcohol industry funding a heart institute or some research that a cardiologist has done, or other research that has been coming out of centers, I'm thinking of as far in the States, where the researchers were clearly benefiting from industry funding. So we're back to the same sort of games that we are very familiar with when it comes to the alcohol industry compared to the tobacco industry.
Mm-hmm. I kind of want to sort of give leave this topic just for a very short period of time and just express that this presentation isn't about blaming people that you drank therefore you have cancer, or it's your fault that you have cancer, because I think it's really important to address this, because a lot of cancer patients can have that sense of responsibility or feel like I must have done something wrong to have been diagnosed with cancer. And I really want to stress it strongly that this is not what this is about. We don't want people leaving this presentation feeling that, oh my God, I drank too much and therefore. This presentation is about awareness. It's about moving forward and making some maybe healthier decisions in our lives. Because I also, although hereditary statistics do say that hereditary does play a role, maybe 10% of the role in the probability of cancer. And then there's lifestyle and environment for sure. But there's also, the quality of our air. And then I also do believe that there's a lot of bad luck as well, that we just get diagnosed with the disease because So I just wanted to sort of make sure that nobody leaves this presentation feeling any sense of blame, because this is not what it's about.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, as a physician, um, I can tell you that as we age, it seems to me that for the privilege of longevity, we get more health problems. So it's the price we pay for being around longer, unfortunately, simply by the fact that we age.
So it sounds like, Peter, the sort of the moral of this story is that it's important for us to get ourselves educated, to understand that in this case, maybe less is more. Maybe start, looking into the whole mocktail, alternative to taking a drink, or having dinner and having bottles of wine. But also to just be, very, very cognizant of all the general areas of our wellness when making life decisions.
Absolutely. And less is better is the main message with regards to this project. Less is better. How low people choose to go is individualized depending upon your own risk profile. But it's interesting as people explore this, they can appreciate that they could alternate an alcoholic beverage with a non-alcoholic one. They can eat before they drink to help absorb the alcohol more gradually, that they can go to low or no alcohol products, and there's more and more available. The industry has pivoted towards this. As much as they may be dragging their feet on labeling, they recognize that consumers are looking for healthier choices. This isn't about not socializing, not enjoying ourselves, but rather being able to do it and still have a healthy lifestyle.
I think that's really well put, and a perfect time for us to maybe see if there's any final questions from our audience. I think we might have actually answered most of them. So on that note, Dr. Peter Butt, I want to thank you on behalf of all the staff, volunteers, participants, and community that are here this evening, for coming and spending some time with us over your dinner hour, because I know there's a time difference.
Not at all. My pleasure. And thank you so very much for those questions and this conversation. Hopefully it was helpful for people in the audience. And stay tuned, because there'll be more information coming out from CCSA with regards to the knowledge mobilization and so on, that hopefully will help consumers to make the shift, to be better informed and increase their alcohol literacy.
Wonderful. Well, I personally feel that my alcohol literacy was increased this evening. So I wish you a wonderful evening. And to all of you, thank you for spending this last hour with us. And stay tuned to more Zoom into Wellnesses, or give us a call or reach out if you have any questions. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.